quantum mania because I had no better title for it. So again, do not be overwhelmed by this. These are things that are supposed to help you understand what is going on when we go to neurology in LU4. These are the things I wish I was lectured to me when I was a first year med student. Okay, so some introductory slides. Do you like biochemistry? No, no, right? So we're in agreement. But those of you who are MBB majors will get most of the slides. Okay, so what are the learning outcomes this time for this particular lecture? So here we're getting into the quantum realm of neurons and peripheral nerves. I mentioned a bit of the blood-brain barrier earlier, and what is new of our knowledge of this. Again, the choroid plexus appears, and then something new that I wish was taught. But I did start teaching when I started teaching in UPCM, the lymphatics. It was not called lymphatics yet at the time. Okay, so with regard to neurons, these are some of the more important things you will encounter when you encounter actual patients with neurological disorders and you really wanted to find out how to help them. What if you had a classmate or a upper class med student who suddenly had behavioral changes and suddenly became a totally different person, bedridden, no longer talks, and no longer the same person before treatment. It could be something attacking one of the basic receptors found on the cell membrane of that student. Or if you had a relative, an elderly relative or a grandparent who's no longer remembers your name, doesn't remember much anymore, tends to argue with the family members, keeps trying to go out of the house, even if it's a pandemic, tries to climb over the fence and escape. And when the person does, they get lost because they cannot find their way around. Or you have a relative who suddenly walks very, very slowly and they cannot move fast anymore. Or you have a friend who has a shrinkage of the muscles in their arms and their legs until they're bedridden, until they're totally bedridden and they need the tube to breathe and the tube to eat. So these succeeding slides are meant to help you understand what is going on because the future is now. And the more we know about these things, the more we make sense of all the nonsense that we learn in med school, especially in biochemistry. So this is the neuron as it is meant to be visualized. It is a three-dimensional structure and you have all those things around it and all those tinier things that we cannot see because they're at the level, they are small and tiny. Let's talk about the NMDA receptor. So again, I'm just introducing to you several characters in a developing story that you'll understand when you reach LU4. So you've seen this in biochemistry. You're sick of it. You've seen what are all these ligands and receptors in the cell membrane. So in the brain, there's an important one. It's called the NMDA, so N-methyl D-aspartate receptor. So it's important in your basic neurotransmission for excitation of the neurons. So you see it's like a door which has to be opened for things to come in. So the door must be opened and it must be closed. If it's open, then you get the so-called depolarization, which will be lectured by Dr. Dasig. So what happens if something attacks that NMDA receptor? Then it's not able to do what it's supposed to be doing. So you encounter this in people actually with the condition we know as schizophrenia, when their NMDA receptors are no longer as functional as they should be. Okay, so this is how it usually works. This is an NMDA receptor and it needs an exciting excitation by this exciting neurotransmitter here, glutamate, which will allow sodium to come in. No? Diba? We're mostly throwing the sodium out. If you let the sodium in, it means you want something to happen. So the sodium comes in, the calcium comes in, and the neuron is excited. And the result is propagation of an electrical impulse. Okay, and what happens here if something blocks your NMDA receptor, then you're like switching off that NMDA receptor from what it usually does. So actually, ketamine is a general anesthetic that is now being tried on people with major depression and schizophrenia. I mean, schizophrenia, hoping to improve on their symptoms. Okay. There are other receptors that you will encounter, which hopefully have been mentioned by OS203, the so-called nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, and the enzymes. You will encounter this in people who get tired very, very easily and get tired so easily and very frequently. So this kind of person will have a drooping of the eyelids, will tend to slur when they talk for a long time, or they become very nasal when they talk, the so-called myasthenia gravis. There are more on that in LU4. So there are other important things we do not have time to discuss right now, but just mentioning them here.